Greenland is not just a landmass. It is a question mark carved into ice. A frozen continent-sized island sitting between North America and Europe, silent, vast, and misunderstood. On maps it looks enormous, almost rivaling Africa in size, yet in reality it holds fewer people than a small town. For centuries, Greenland has been viewed not as a home, but as a prize, an empty space waiting for ownership. And time and again, powerful nations have looked at it not with curiosity, but with calculation. To understand why Greenland became one of the most controversial real estate ideas in modern history, we must begin with what it truly is. Greenland, known to its indigenous Inuit population as Kalaalleq Nunat, is the world's largest island, located in the Arctic and Atlantic Oceans. Nearly 80% of its surface is covered by a massive ice sheet, thicker in some places than 2 kilometers. This ice holds enough frozen water to raise global sea levels by over 7 meters if fully melted. Greenland is not just land, it is climate, power, and future risk combined into one. Long before foreign powers ever argued over Greenland, people already lived there. The Inuit have survived in this harsh environment for thousands of years, adapting to extreme cold, long darkness, and isolation. Their knowledge of ice, wildlife, and seasonal survival made life possible where outsiders saw only death. Yet history repeatedly ignored them. Like many indigenous lands across the world, Greenland was treated as empty simply because it did not fit European definitions of civilization. The first outsiders to attempt ownership came from Scandinavia. Norse settlers arrived around the 10th century, led by Eric the Red, establishing small colonies along Greenland's southern coast. These settlements eventually vanished, likely due to climate cooling, isolation, and economic collapse. But their arrival planted an idea that would later be weaponized. Greenland could be claimed. By the 18th century, Denmark formalized control over Greenland, eventually making it a colony. From Copenhagen's perspective, Greenland was not valuable for its people, but for its location. Control of Greenland meant influence over Arctic trade routes and access to the North Atlantic. Still, for most of history, Greenland was seen as a financial burden rather than an asset. That perception began to change in the 19th century, when global powers started thinking in terms of geography as strategy. Empires realized that land itself, especially land near key sea routes, was power. This is where Greenland quietly entered the thinking of the world's most ambitious nations. Across the Atlantic, the United States was expanding aggressively. In 1867, Washington had already stunned the world by purchasing Alaska from Russia, an idea widely mocked at the time. Critics called it useless ice. History would later prove otherwise. Alaska turned out to be rich in oil, minerals, and military value. That lesson stayed embedded in American strategic thinking. Greenland, in many ways, looked like Alaska's twin. Ice-covered, remote, sparsely populated, but enormous in position perfectly between Europe and North America. To some American strategists, it was not a frozen wasteland. It was a chess squared. In 1868, just 1 year after Alaska was acquired, internal discussions began in Washington about the possibility of acquiring Greenland as well. The logic was simple: control Greenland, and you control the Arctic Gateway. At the time, Denmark was economically weak, and Greenland was draining resources. On paper, it looked like a deal waiting to happen, but Greenland was different. Unlike Alaska, it was deeply tied to European politics. Selling it would have meant more than money, it would have meant reshaping power balances in the North Atlantic. Denmark hesitated, and the idea quietly died. For decades, Greenland returned to the shadows of global politics. Everything changed during World War II. When Nazi Germany occupied Denmark in 1940, Greenland suddenly became strategically exposed. The United States stepped in, establishing military bases on the island to prevent German control. Greenland transformed overnight from forgotten colony to frontline territory. During the Cold War, Greenland's importance exploded. The Arctic became a potential battlefield between nuclear superpowers, and Greenland sat directly beneath the shortest missile path between North America and the Soviet Union. Radar stations, air bases, and early warning systems were built across the ice. Greenland was no longer land, it was a shield, yet even as its strategic value grew, Greenland itself remained largely voiceless. Decisions about its land, its airspace, and its future were made far away, in Washington and Copenhagen. This imbalance laid the foundation for future controversy. In the 21st century, climate change introduced a new dimension. As Arctic ice began to melt, previously inaccessible resources, rare earth minerals, oil, gas, and shipping routes, came into view. Greenland was suddenly not just a military asset, but an economic one. What was once locked under ice was now becoming reachable. This is where history takes a dramatic turn. In 2019, the world was stunned when Donald Trump publicly suggested that the United States should buy Greenland. The reaction was instant ridicule. Memes flooded the internet. Headlines mocked the idea as absurd. But behind the laughter was a deeper truth. This was not a new idea at all. The proposal echoed more than 150 years of strategic thinking. Greenland had always been valuable, it was just finally obvious to everyone else, and that is where the danger begins, because Greenland is not empty land. It is home. It is climate infrastructure. It is geopolitical leverage. And treating it like a real estate deal ignores everything history has already warned us about. Greenland does not look powerful. Covered in ice, battered by storms, and home to fewer than 60,000 people, it appears fragile and distant from the centers of global power. But in the modern world, power is no longer measured only by population or cities. It is measured by positioning, resources, and timing. And Greenland sits at the intersection of all three. Geographically, Greenland is one of the most strategically located pieces of land on Earth. It lies directly between North America and Europe, acting as a physical bridge across the Arctic. Any aircraft, missile, satellite signal, or shipping route passing through the Northern Hemisphere inevitably crosses near Greenland. This alone makes it invaluable to military planners. During the Cold War, this reality became terrifyingly clear. Nuclear war strategies depended on early warning systems, and Greenland became a critical listening post. Radar installations on its frozen surface could detect incoming missiles hours before they reached their targets. In a conflict measured in minutes, those hours meant survival. Greenland was no longer peripheral, it was central. The most famous symbol of this era is Thule Air Base, built by the United States in northern Greenland. From here, American forces monitored Soviet activity across the Arctic. Even today, the base remains operational, integrated into modern missile defense systems. The Cold War may have ended, but Greenland's military relevance did not. It simply evolved. In the 21st century, military power expanded beyond missiles and aircraft. Space became the new battlefield. Satellites now control navigation, communication, and intelligence. Greenland's location makes it ideal for tracking objects in low Earth orbit, monitoring polar satellite paths, and maintaining space surveillance infrastructure. In a world increasingly dependent on satellites, Greenland is an anchor point, but military importance is only one layer of the story. The real transformation came with climate change. For thousands of years, Greenland's ice acted as a natural lock, sealing away its true value. Beneath the ice lie vast deposits of rare earth elements, uranium, iron ore, zinc, and potentially oil and gas. These resources were once unreachable. Now, as temperatures rise and ice retreats, they are becoming accessible. Rare earth minerals are especially critical. They are essential for modern technology, smartphones, electric vehicles, wind turbines, military hardware, and advanced weapons systems. Control over these materials means control over supply chains that define the modern economy. Today, global supply of rare earths is dominated by China. This dominance gives Beijing enormous leverage. Any alternative source immediately becomes strategically important. Greenland is one of the few places on Earth with the potential to challenge that monopoly. This has not gone unnoticed. Chinese companies have shown strong interest in Greenland's mining sector, proposing investments in airports, ports, and infrastructure. On the surface, these are economic partnerships. But to military analysts, they represent influence, long-term presence in a region that shapes global power. This is where Greenland becomes dangerous, not dangerous because of weapons, but because of competition. As Arctic ice melts, new shipping routes are opening. The Northern Sea Route and potential transpolar passages could dramatically shorten travel times between Asia, Europe, and North America. These routes bypass traditional choke points like the Suez Canal. Whoever controls Arctic infrastructure will shape the future of global trade. Greenland sits along these emerging pathways. Ports, refueling stations, search and rescue hubs, all could turn the island into a gatekeeper of Arctic commerce. This transforms Greenland from a passive landmass into an active regulator of economic flow. Meanwhile, Greenland itself is changing politically. Once a Danish colony, Greenland gained home rule in 1979 and expanded self-governance in 2009. Today, it controls most domestic affairs, including natural resources. Only defense and foreign policy remain largely with Denmark. This has fueled a growing independence movement among Greenlanders, driven by economic self-sufficiency and cultural identity, but independence comes with risk. A fully independent Greenland would need partners, investors, and security guarantees. This opens the door for powerful nations to exert influence through economic dependency. What looks like development can quickly become leverage. This is why the United States reacted so strongly in 2019 when Greenland's strategic importance returned to headlines. When Donald Trump suggested purchasing Greenland, it sounded crude, but the underlying concern was real. Washington was alarmed by growing Chinese and Russian interest in the Arctic. Russia, for its part, has dramatically expanded its Arctic military presence, reopening Cold War bases and deploying advanced weapon systems along its northern coast. Moscow views the Arctic as essential to its national security and economic future. Greenland, positioned opposite Russian territory across the Arctic Ocean, naturally becomes part of that strategic equation. Denmark now finds itself in an uncomfortable position, responsible for Greenland's defense, but lacking the power of larger nations. Copenhagen must balance Greenlandic autonomy, NATO obligations, and global competition, all while avoiding turning the island into a proxy battleground. And through all of this, climate change accelerates. Melting ice is not just revealing resources, it is destabilizing the environment Greenlanders depend on. Traditional hunting patterns are disrupted. Infrastructure built on permafrost is collapsing. Communities face relocation. Greenland's future is being reshaped by forces far beyond its control. This is the true danger of treating Greenland like real estate. Real estate implies ownership, profit, and transactions. But Greenland is not property. It is a living system, a strategic keystone, and a homeland. Every move made by global powers carries consequences not just for politics, but for climate, culture, and survival. For most of the world, Greenland is an idea, a strategic location, a reserve of resources, a piece of a geopolitical puzzle. But for the people who live there, Greenland is not a concept. It is home. And the growing global interest in this frozen island has forced Greenlanders to confront a question that will define their future: independence at what cost? Greenland's political identity has been shaped by centuries of outside control. For much of its modern history, decisions about land, economy, and governance were made in Copenhagen. While Denmark invested in infrastructure, education, and healthcare, it also controlled trade, foreign relations, and defense. This created a dependency that was stable, but limiting. The push towards self-rule gained momentum in the mid-20th century, as decolonization movements spread across the globe. In 1979, Greenland achieved home rule, allowing local control over education, health, and internal affairs. 30 years later, in 2009, self-government expanded even further, recognizing Greenlanders as a distinct people under international law and granting authority over natural resources. Today, Greenland governs itself through its own parliament, Inatsisartut, based in the capital city of Nuuk. Elections are held democratically, and political debate is vibrant. Independence is no longer a distant dream, it is an active topic of public discussion. But independence is not just a political declaration. It is an economic challenge. Greenland's economy remains heavily dependent on Denmark, which provides an annual block grant covering a significant portion of public spending. This funding supports essential services, from hospitals to schools. Ending this financial relationship would require Greenland to replace that income, most likely through natural resource extraction. This is where identity collides with geopolitics. Mining offers potential wealth, but it also brings risk. Extracting rare earth minerals, uranium, and other resources could fund independence. At the same time, it could expose Greenland to environmental damage and foreign influence. Each mining license, each infrastructure project, becomes not just an economic decision, but a strategic one. Foreign investors do not arrive without expectations. Capital comes with conditions, access, influence, and long-term presence. For a small nation with limited administrative capacity, managing these relationships is a delicate balancing act. Many Greenlanders worry that rushing toward independence through resource extraction could replace one dependency with another. Instead of relying on Denmark, Greenland could become economically tied to foreign corporations or governments. Political autonomy does not always guarantee economic freedom. Cultural preservation adds another layer of concern. The Greenlandic language, Kalaalisit, and Inuit traditions are central to national identity. Rapid industrialization threatens to reshape communities, drawing workers from abroad and altering social structures. For some, independence means protecting culture, not trading it for profit. Generational divides are emerging. Younger Greenlanders often support independence but demand sustainability and environmental protection. Older generations, shaped by decades of Danish support, tend to prioritize stability. Both perspectives reflect real fears and real hopes. Meanwhile, global powers watch closely. The United States views Greenland through the lens of security. Its interest lies in preventing rival powers from gaining influence. China sees opportunity, access to resources and Arctic presence. Russia sees geography, a strategic counterbalance in the Arctic theater. Denmark seeks balance, attempting to respect Greenlandic autonomy while fulfilling its NATO obligations. Greenland stands at the center of these competing interests, not by choice, but by geography. Every step toward independence increases its exposure to global pressure. Every delay risks continued dependency. There is no neutral path. This is why the idea of buying Greenland resonates so deeply, and so dangerously. It reduces a nation's struggle for self-determination to a transaction. It ignores the human cost of strategic competition. And it echoes a colonial mindset that history has repeatedly proven destructive. Yet Greenland is not powerless. Its leaders are increasingly assertive, setting conditions on foreign investment and emphasizing transparency. International law recognizes the right of Greenlanders to self-determination. And global awareness of indigenous rights has grown stronger than ever before. The future of Greenland will not be decided in a single deal or announcement. It will be shaped gradually, through elections, negotiations, and choices made under pressure. Independence, if it comes, will be complex, marked by compromise rather than celebration alone. What makes Greenland uniquely vulnerable is also what makes it uniquely important. It is a test case for the 21st century. Can small nations protect their identity in a world dominated by great powers? Can development occur without exploitation? Can climate change be addressed without turning survival into opportunity for others? Greenland's story is still unfolding. At first glance, the idea sounds simple. One nation buys land from another. Money changes hands. Borders are redrawn. History moves on. But Greenland exposes the illusion behind that simplicity. Because Greenland was never just land, and that is why the deal could never happen. The proposal to buy Greenland shocked the world not because it was unprecedented, but because it was outdated. In earlier centuries, land was traded like currency. Empires expanded through treaties written far from the people affected. Maps were redrawn with ink, not consent. Greenland itself lived under that reality for generations, but the modern world operates under different rules, at least in theory. Today, sovereignty is not defined solely by ownership. It is defined by people, identity, and international law. Greenland is not Denmark's property to sell, nor is it an empty territory waiting for a flag. It is a self-governing nation with its own parliament, culture, and future aspirations. Any attempt to reduce it to a transaction ignores decades of political evolution. This is why the idea collapsed instantly, yet the fact that it was even suggested reveals something deeper. How global powers still think about space, resources, and control. Greenland sits at the convergence of the world's biggest crises. Climate change, resource scarcity, military competition, and indigenous rights all intersect on this single island. It is a pressure point, a place where the consequences of global decisions become impossible to ignore. Climate change is the first and most visible force reshaping Greenland. The ice sheet is melting at an accelerating pace, contributing directly to rising sea levels worldwide. What happens in Greenland does not stay in Greenland. Coastal cities thousands of kilometers away are already feeling the effects. This makes Greenland not just a victim of climate change, but a global regulator of it. Decisions about mining, infrastructure, and development on the island carry planetary consequences. Treating Greenland as real estate ignores the fact that it functions as climate infrastructure, one that cannot be replaced once damaged. The second force is resource competition. As the world transitions to renewable energy and advanced technology, demand for rare earth minerals continues to surge. These materials are essential for electric vehicles, wind turbines, batteries, and military systems. Greenland holds some of the most promising untapped reserves on Earth, but extraction comes with a paradox. Mining the resources needed to fight climate change can itself accelerate environmental destruction. For Greenland, the question is not just whether resources should be developed, but who benefits, who decides, and who bears the cost. The third force is militarization. The Arctic is no longer a buffer zone. It is becoming an arena. As ice retreats, military activity increases. Bases are expanded. Patrols intensify. Surveillance deepens. Greenland's location makes it indispensable to missile defense, satellite tracking, and Arctic dominance. No sail could ever separate Greenland from this reality. Ownership would not remove strategic competition, it would amplify it. The fourth force, and perhaps the most overlooked, is people. Greenland's population is small, but its voice is growing stronger. Younger generations are politically engaged, globally aware, and determined to shape their own destiny. They are not asking who should own Greenland. They are asking how Greenland should exist in the world. This marks a profound shift. The future of Greenland is no longer a question of control, but of consent. This is why the concept of buying Greenland was not just impractical, it was dangerous. It revived a mindset that views land as an asset and people as an afterthought. History shows where that path leads: resistance, instability, and long-term conflict. In this sense, Greenland becomes a warning that climate change will turn previously ignored regions into flashpoints. A warning that resource scarcity will test ethical boundaries. A warning that small nations will face enormous pressure as great powers compete. Greenland is not unique in these challenges, but it is early. It is the first major test of whether the world can adapt its behavior before old patterns repeat themselves. If Greenland chooses independence, it will do so carefully, aware that freedom without safeguards can become vulnerability. If it remains connected to Denmark, it will continue pushing for greater autonomy and respect. Either way, Greenland's path will be shaped by negotiation, not purchase. The real question, then, is not whether Greenland can be bought. It is whether the world can move beyond the idea that it should be, because the future will not be decided by who owns land, but by who protects it. Greenland stands at the edge of the world, but also at the center of its future. What happens there will echo far beyond ice and snow, into oceans, economies, and generations yet to come, and that is why Greenland may be the most dangerous real estate deal in history, not because it could happen, but because it shows us what happens when we try.